The biggest issues that we came up with was how to not only configure it so we had two forms of egress for all the residential tenants while still having desirable layouts, but then also how we could manage and increase electric load, increase sewage load. Mind you, this building was first built in the 1890s. This is an old building. So a lot of the infrastructure was quite old, and we had to completely overhaul the whole thing.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owners Association, where real estate investors have found success since 1968. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group. This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB & Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 403. One of the after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic has been an increase in people working from home and a decrease in the need for office space. This has had a dramatic effect on office buildings as an asset class, and it continues to be a problem with only half of the workforce returning to the office. Many developers are considering repurposing vacant office buildings into residential and apartment buildings, but doing that can be a lot more difficult than it seems. Today's guest is nearing completion of an office to apartment conversion, and he's here to share his experiences, both good and bad. Andrew Hinton is the acquisition lead for GL Capital, which focuses on apartment syndication and development in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started investing in real estate.
My name's Andrew Hinton. I got started in real estate investment, flipping houses. I was one of those guys who watched the HGTV shows and thought it would be a no-brainer. So we were purchasing houses in the Baltimore area. We had pretty much a routine under $100,000, and we were, going in, rehabbing and selling. And we got lucky, I guess, the timing and the market we were in. We were able to, purchase 8 homes, sell 8 homes within the first couple of years. And then from there, built what is now a multifamily syndication business, a property management arm. And yeah, we're doing great.
Tell us a little bit about this building and how you came across it and came up with the idea of, hey, let's convert it to apartments.
So with the success we had in doing the small scale, redevelopment projects, we had done a 4-unit redevelopment, and we were aware that in Baltimore City, there were a number of vacant office buildings. So we were interested in looking at those and basically doing the same thing, gut rehab and conversion into, multifamily. And so the building in question was one that I had actually been to. There was a bar, a restaurant on the first floor, and it was called Mick O'Shea's. Everybody in Baltimore knows it. I used to watch NBA games there, and I heard a few years later, right around this time when we were looking to upgrade into doing the conversions, and it was for sale. So I walked in, it was all vacant office upstairs with 2 restaurants on the first floor and also some first floor retail space as well that was vacant. And so it was putting off about $14,000 a month from the restaurants. And it was about 30,000 square feet of vacant office space. So we had our contractors in there. We had a budget put together, and it really felt like it was going to be a home run. We were a 10% cap rate existing, plus, the upside of converting it into multifamily.
So just to make sure I'm tracking, is the restaurant still there? Like you're building above the existing restaurant?
Yes.
And how many square foot were you converting, and how many units did you think you could get out of that?
We thought about 22 units residential, and then there was the 6 retail on the first floor, two restaurants. Actually, the one restaurant had a convenience store as well. So we were thinking in total 28. At the end of the day, we're going to have 20 larger apartments. Just the way the office was configured with the egress situation, we had to reduce that number.
Talk about that because that's so important. I mean, egress and, people think, oh, you can just convert office to residential, but it's not that easy because there's quite often layout issues, structural issues that prevent you from putting in as many units as you wanted. What were some of the challenges you had there that caused you to go from 28 units to 20 units?
The two biggest issues I think that we confronted, that we've actually looked at a few other office buildings since then, and it's really the same issue, is, you've got to get multiple forms of egress and the whole alarm and sprinkler system configured to your apartment use, and then also infrastructure. So water utilities, electric utilities, plumbing, sewage, those issues, the office building has considerably less waste and, showers, bathrooms, and, the kitchen waste. So, the biggest issues that we came up with was how to not only configure it so we had two forms of egress for all the residential tenants while still having desirable layouts, but then also how we could manage and increase electric load, increase sewage load. Mind you, this building was first built in the 1890s. This is an old building. So a lot of the infrastructure was quite old, and we had to completely overhaul the whole thing.
Yeah, well, we're in Grand Rapids, so it's a similar situation. A lot of our buildings are 100 years old or older. So when you're getting into the bones, there you find a lot of things. Like, what were some of the surprises you found as you dug into this building?
The biggest surprise that we found was, I guess, in a positive way, as a historic building, there were a lot of, we would rip off a ceiling and we would realize that there was a perfectly intact tin ceiling above. And so, the window trim, the tin ceilings, there was some, historical architectural that was quite unique in this particular property. So we would basically, we gutted it, but instead of gutting it to the studs, we'd gut it and just discover this really unique historical component. And that was a fun process. The demo process, the architectural process, that was really the highlight of this whole experience for me.
So were you said there were other retail spaces downstairs. So it's not just the restaurant, it's additional retail. Is that retail all full, or are you repurposing that as well?
The biggest challenge to this project has been the fact that all of the whole building has to be under the fire department looks at the entire structure as one. And so we were intending to have those retail apartments open, but they were not permitted to be so until we were able to get the final alarm panel and sprinkler system inspected. Mind you, the pandemic and some other issues caused a lot of delays. So whereas we were thinking, 2 years, we're open upstairs, and if not, right from the get-go, we were able to open on the first floor. That plan was pretty much immediately shut down. So there was actually a cease and desist order put on one of the first floor retail spaces, even though it was a few feet from the entrance and did have a working sprinkler and alarm. It was because the rest of the building was under construction. So for those of you who see that first, the potential for revenue while you are doing the heavy construction process, which was a positive for us, turned out to be something that made things a lot more difficult.
It's interesting because the things that seem logical to a developer may conflict with what the city sees as necessary. So what was that push and pull like with the codes and the compliance and the inspectors? How has that been for you? I'd imagine it's been somewhat turbulent given the age of the property.
I don't think the city's aligned with developers in many ways. I think for the city officials to approve something, it could potentially cause them the consequences if something were to happen. Whereas if they don't approve it, then they never really have anything to worry about. So it's a big challenge, I think, it will be a big challenge for anyone that's trying to convert an office building without really the city's support, because there's so many things that they could enforce, and they are the ultimate, I guess, authority, at least in Baltimore City. So yeah, so they were, and I'll just give you an example. They had approved plans. We built everything to the specifications of the plans. And then we were ready for our final inspection. They came in and they identified a laundry list of items. Fire safety. I want my building to be safe. So we performed all of those requirements, and then they came back to reinspect, and there was a new list. Mind you, everything had already been permitted and approved. So what I really like, I guess, to just share is some of these things could have been designed in advance, but also I think the fire department's proactivity doesn't really exist. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it gets an issue because we're developing here in Grand Rapids too, and there is kind of this push and pull between the architecture, the engineering, how that is perceived by the inspectors who have the ultimate say. And I've noticed this too on our project, where the inspectors will sign off on something and then see it in real life and change their mind completely and make us go back to the drawing board. And that it's interesting to hear that that's a problem in Baltimore. And from my understanding, it's a problem everywhere, where the city inspectors really can throw a lot of monkey wrenches into the project. So I'm wondering, like, how did that change your overall budget and timeline going through that process?
The challenge has not been the construction budget. I think I'll give you an example so it's easy to understand. The two restaurants had a hood system, and the hood systems were being monitored. So there was an alarm sounding in the restaurant, but that hood system needed to be connected to the main fire alarm. Makes sense. Perfectly reasonable plan. Those restaurants have existed for 10, 20, 30 years, I think. The pub, at least. The other one, at least 10 years. There was no question that these restaurants were going to continue to exist. So when the plans were first submitted and approved, they had gone through the same person who comes out to do the inspections is looking at the plans during the review process. So those plans were approved and inspected. Fast forward, project's done. They do their final walkthrough and they say, wait, are those updated hood systems? And, we said no. So they said, okay, that needs to be done. So that took about 2 months in order to do it. It cost like $2,500. So the 2 months though cost about, in terms of holding costs, maybe 40 grand. The rates had gone up. I don't know if you're aware of that. So, our construction loan rate, almost doubled. So things like that, the expensive part is the holding costs, and these lists that seem to keep coming every time we get the inspector out takes months. And so that's the real cost.
So I like to hear the good and the bad. So let's draw on the bad a little bit more. What other, because I know that there are people out there who are listening to this who are thinking of doing the same thing. What are some of the things that you would tell them up front to make sure that they lock before they get started? Like, what do they need to be aware of getting into this?
I would say everything that could go wrong in this project seemed to go wrong. And there were certain people that, I guess I was managing the project, but there are certain elements, right? The design process, the architect you use, the MEP, so mechanical, electrical, plumbing designers you use, the engineers, they are critical to your success. And it's hard when you're doing bigger projects than you've done to know who the right person to hire is to do your engineering and your architecture. And so we actually had to switch architects and engineers at one point in the project. It was the new engineer who also, they had something designed, built, approved by a utility company, built by the city, and then it was incorrect. So the final inspector came out, saw that it was incorrect. We had to basically redo that. So even when you pick the right people, there's still things that are going to come up. And so I don't know if there's a lesson in there, except that, that engineer and architect could save you thousands of dollars. And the really the best ones are very, very expensive. And I think I looked at that expense and saw, how can I value engineer the engineering and design work? And I probably underpaid, and I probably paid for it, overpaid for it. And then, the pandemic, nobody's going to predict that's going to happen. The restaurants had a little bit of trouble. We didn't want to be the landlords that, force people to close their business. So we deferred some of the rent, and then one of them had to be restructured. So, that I thought was actually a pretty good outcome because we ended up collecting the full amount of the rent. They survived, but definitely other landlords that took the hard line and basically said, you're struggling, but that doesn't matter. You need to pay the rent. And they closed down. They're still closed down.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB & Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. Obviously, you started before the pandemic hit, and the pandemic happened while you were under construction. Is that what I'm hearing?
2018, we took about a year of entitlements, and we started construction in 2019. So most of the construction was during the pandemic.
Yeah, very interesting to hear after the fact how those decisions you had to make during the pandemic worked out, because it was very prevalent for landlords to have to make this decision. How do I work with my retail tenants who aren't able to operate? Do I still make them pay rent and evict them if they don't? Or do I give them some sort of forbearance? And it sounds like you went the forbearance route, and that's paid off for you. Is that true?
Yeah. Both the restaurants are still in business. One of the pub has come back and is doing great again. And it's a conversation. Nobody knows what's happening. Our mission is to provide a great return on investment for investors, but also to be 100% reliable and respectful to our tenants. And I think that you're a human being. People are unable to work. They're talking about going out of business or all their staff being left unemployed in the worst health crisis in our history. So I think we did a good job balancing that. We needed to be collecting rent, but also we needed those spaces to be occupied in the long run. And so it was a win-win solution to basically defer. We didn't remove rent, but we deferred it to later in the lease period when they could repay. And when they were off, we didn't demand that they make the full payment.
Well, that's great to hear. And it's also illustrative that other landlords who insisted on getting paid rent during the pandemic, those tenants went out of business, and now they have an empty space. So that decision, it turns out after the fact, not to have been the right decision to not allow forbearance and work with the tenant. Very interesting. I want to go back to what you said about architecture and engineering, because that's so important when you're doing development or repurposing, because those architectural plans, the engineering plans will make or break the project. And often they're not aligned with what the inspectors actually want to see. We did a project, an old repurposing of an old building where one of our units needed to be ADA compliant. And we had our architecture design it, knowing full well it needed to be ADA. And when the inspectors got there, they're like, this is not ADA compliant. So we had to rip it apart and make it ADA compliant. I mean, it's really amazing how these drawings and decisions and engineering plans that are there from the start can lead to all kinds of problems throughout the project. I mean, did you experience that in other instances as well?
I think I took a hard line in the beginning, and I've come a long way in my own personal development through this. And I think the lessons learned will be immensely valuable in the long run. The approach I took is that, they weren't allowed to make a mistake, and that it wasn't a dynamic process of communication and working together between me, the owner, the contractor, the architect, to resolve things. It's a 200-year-old building. They weren't trying to spend all their time. Also, we weren't paying them to spend all their time. So when something came up, it should have been, architect, contractor, meet at the building, look at the new condition. If it needed something, like we had to build a fourth floor, we wanted to get a few extra units. We built a fourth floor basically to egress to both sides, a whole new addition. And that process became a little bit, the contractor and architect seemed to be pitted against each other. And I was kind of in the middle, rather than bring everyone together and saying, hey, how do we build this? How do we permit it? And how do we get it submitted so we can build the thing? So with that said, there were other things that, the architect really ought to have put in the initial plans. There's also so many parties, like the fire alarm company does their plans, the engineer does their plans, the general contractor could have been a little better as the facilitator of all those conversations. So, but yeah, I think communication is key. And I feel like we, at one point in the project, instead of getting together and communicating better, we were more inclined to just go to a different direction and choose a new designer architect.
Yeah, it's funny when things go wrong in development and construction. There's a lot of finger pointing. It's never anyone's fault. It's the other party's fault, and I've certainly experienced that as well. Yeah. But communication is key, and anyone who's starting a development project or thinking of doing something, I think the message here is really try to hold people accountable from the start, and make sure people are communicating and everyone is on the same page. That's the lesson I've learned through the development process. But let's talk about where things went right. Where have things gone right? I think you told me just before we hit record that you're 99% of the way done. So tell us where you are and what the outlook is.
The silver lining is the rent growth in our area. Since 2018, 2019, we first underwrote it. We're about 20% higher. That's huge. So where we didn't get things done as quickly, we definitely were on the right side of the rent growth. We have fully leased the first floor. So once we do get the inspection approved, we've got a wonderful tenant who's a plant store, but they're getting their liquor license to be able to serve wine. So you can get a plant from Australia and a bottle of wine from Australia. And they're going to do events and all that. There's a bookstore that leased one of the other retail space. The 2 restaurants are doing fine. 8 out of the 15 apartments are leased. So, we're going to do fine. We're going to hold it. We're going to refinance. We're probably going to get a 5 or 7 year term. This is a project I love to have in my portfolio, kind of pass along to my kids one day. So, it's a kind of property that we're going to be fine. And I think what it's doing for the community, what it's doing for our, investors, as if they hold on, if they just keep it going, and what it's going to do for our company is tremendous. So, the silver lining is just, if you look at the long run, we're going to be okay. We're going to use what we learned and do a lot better on the next one.
I'm curious, like you before COVID, you did your pro formas. It's interesting that your rents have gone up 20%, at least 20% since then. So that is sort of the saving grace. What are the dynamics in Baltimore? Are you guys overbuilt? Is there a housing shortage? I mean, what are you seeing on the ground there?
Baltimore's a great rental market. We are constantly fully occupied. We have a vacancy, and most of the times it's pre-leased before the move out. I think that's a testament to the fact that there's just a lot of good industry. The Washington D.C., the Philadelphia area, it's a corridor that presents itself really well for large companies. The CEO of Under Armour's building a whole new neighborhood that just came online. There's been a few large scale office conversions in the same market that we were doing ours, and absorption is good. So I think a lot of the rent growth came from the inflation to a degree, and not necessarily, an undersupply, but at the same time, I don't think there's so much growth, so much new supply coming that it's going to tilt the balance. I think we're moderate amount of new supply, and it's just a really strong rental market.
It sounds like you had investors in this development or this conversion project. How did you communicate with them during the process? Because a lot happened that you had to communicate. How did you handle that?
Thank God those investors had, trusted us, and we're also involved in some of our other projects. So, across the board, we've done really well. Brown's Arcade, which is the office conversion, is the one that, has been the longest delay from start to finish. And yeah, we communicated. We do quarterly reports. We basically let them know exactly where we're at in the process. We try to be transparent, so it's not like, we say one thing and time goes on and they're like, well, what happened is, we're caught on this final fire safety inspection, and we were last quarter, and we still are. And if they want to have a one-on-one conversation, we make ourselves available. So I think communication is the most important thing when you're dealing with investors, particularly if the project's going great. They're not going to have any reason to want to call you unless there's a new investment coming up. But for Brown's Arcade, for our investors in this deal, we had to reach out and just make sure that they knew that we were doing everything possible to make this successful, and that we thought about them and this project every day, and we're going to do whatever we could to get it done. And yeah, no real issues outside of just trying to keep good communication with them.
So where are you right now? I mean, do you have certificate of occupancy? It sounds like you've got the retail lease, but they can't move in yet. So what's the latest?
There was basically a demising wall that had to be built to reduce the square footage to the front exit. And it was about 12 square feet by, 9 feet in height. So very, very light project that had to be permitted and approved. So right now we're in the approval process for that demising wall that serves absolutely no function, but is something that the fire marshal requested from us. So as soon as that's done, we can inspect that, and the whole building gets approved. We can move everybody in. So September 1st is the goal still. And yeah, it literally could be done, or we could be here in December and still like, why can't they come out and inspect this building?
Tell our listeners how they can find out more about you, get a hold of you, and feel free to plug your company and what you do.
A lot of this conversation was related to the one office conversion. I really think it's an important message for people who are interested in doing larger scale developments, maybe doing office conversions. I think there is a opportunity. I don't necessarily think that's going to be something we pursue in the immediate future, but if you're interested in reaching out one-on-one to discuss a project with me, I'd be more than happy. On the flip side, we do a lot of value add multifamily. That's our bread and butter. That's something we've been able to generate really strong returns for our investors. We have 109 units closing next month, 354 closing by the end of the year. So 464 before the end of this year, 2023. And, we are really excited that we've been able to grow and really thrive in the multifamily value add space. My website is www.glcapital.io. And if you want to reach me, my email address, ah@glcapital.io. And yeah, whether you're starting out or interested in some of our large scale projects, please reach out. I'd love to talk to you.
And Andrew, what's your favorite hack or app?
So we've been using a lot of virtual assistants. I think that's something that comes up a lot. I guess it's a hack. I don't know if it's a hack, but Upwork, you can find a really great support, personal assistants, or executive assistants in your business that really help you leverage your time back. And just reading or the Audible, the podcast, I listen to them all the time, and something that you can learn from other people's mistakes, just like maybe you can learn from today's discussion about the office conversion gone wrong, and use it to fuel your own ideas about your business.
Well, thanks for coming on the show and talking about that office conversion gone wrong. But I don't think in the end, I think in the end, it will actually go very right. And a lot of this will seem like a blip 5 years from now because you've built new housing. There's such a great demand for new housing that sort of makes everything else come out in the wash. But I do appreciate you sharing the tough road that you've gone through. And I certainly commiserate with you because I've experienced a lot of the same things over the past year or so. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It's been a real pleasure talking with you, Andrew. And I want to thank you for sharing that experience with us.
Absolutely, Brian. I appreciate you for having me.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's HIG investor.com.